Kali Linux is a system that you can use for hacking. So this is what it looks like. If you click on the Start menu, you'll see different applications. So you can scroll down and you'll see all kinds of applications that you can use for cracking. You'll see also categories, so password attacks. You'll see there's, for example, John the Ripper and many other programs, wireless attacks, reverse engineering, exploitation tools, sniffing, spoofing, post-exploitation. So all kinds of things you can do with Kali Linux. So many different categories and stages of the hack. And also different, like web application attacks will be different from attacks. And that's why they have different tools. For example, with wireless attacks, you might want to look into aircrack. With a password attack, John the Ripper or Hashcat is programs that might be much more interesting. Now you'll see there's also subcategories, so offline attacks, online attacks. So depending on what you want to attack. So in this course, you will learn some basic tools. So we won't go through all of these tools that you see here, but for example, we'll use one for online attacks called Hydra. We'll look into John the Ripper. We'll look into password attacks, so different tools for that. We'll also look into hash cracking a bit and explain some basics like what are ports, what are servers, and all those kind of things. And in this course, you will need Kali Linux, of course, for executing the hacking. And you also need the victim's computer. So the victim's computer can either be a Virtualbox image. So if you run the Virtualbox program, you can run virtual computers. That way you can run Kali and your target side by side. Or you can use two real computers, one running Kali Linux and one running the victim's computer. And then you can try to hack into it. So then you would boot it to root it. And root is the super user, so it means basically boot to hack it. So that's what we'll look into this course, to teach you some basics of hacking, like password attacks, hash cracking, and how to get initial access into a system. In this course, we'll use a system called Kali Linux. This is a system that is created specifically for security and hacking. So you can get this system from kali.org. If you open a web browser and go to kali.org. So if you go to kali.org, you can click on downloads. That's www.kali.org. Click on download and you can download this system and there's different ways to run it. For example, you can run it bare metal, which is when you have it installed on your computer and you can just turn on your computer and you have Kali. You can run it in a virtual machine. So a virtual machine is when you have a virtual computer on top of your computer. So just to clear that up, if I search Virtualbox, click on images, you'll see some examples of that. For example, let me scroll down a bit. Here it seems they have this image. So here you'll see there's a Windows computer and there's the installation of Windows in a virtual computer. So a virtual computer simulates the whole computer. So you can run multiple systems at once. For example, here they have a Mac computer and inside they are running a Linux computer, a Ubuntu computer. Here there is also two Windows computers. So basically with a virtualization, you can run multiple systems at once. Now here it seems they are running a Windows computer, but it is on top of a Apple computer. So on OS X they are running a virtual Windows computer. So a virtual computer does exactly the same things as a real computer, and you can run multiple times your computer systems, and you can run different computer systems at once. So actually what I'm using now is the Virtualbox. So I'm using virtual computer. You'll see Kali Linux is running. And in the other Virtualbox I am running Ubuntu server. You can run many systems at once. So for example, I have Kali running here and different Ubuntu Linux systems. You might also have Windows here or other systems. and you can run them on top of your existing computer. So it's one way to run Kali Linux. So I'm using Virtualbox for that, but depends on how you prefer running it. Now you can also run it on mobile. So on some mobile phones you can run Kali Linux. You can run it in the cloud. And also live boot, which is a really nice way to run it, because you can install Kali on a USB disk. You plug in the USB disk, restart your computer, boot from that USB, and you have Kali Linux. So it's one of the most easy ways to run it. Either you can download it and install it. So any of those options. So if I go back up, you can click on it to download it. So if you click on it, it gives you a download link. So you can download here the ISO file and install it. For example, with the USB flash drive, we can click on it, scroll down, click on the download button. That will download it to the disk. And then we need to write it on the USB flash drive. So you need to have a USB flash drive. And we need to write it. So we can do it, for example, with balena.io. Let me see where this program is. Balena Etcher. So with this website, balena.io/etcher. And you have 3 steps. You select the image you download, select the drive and click flash. That will create the USB flash drive to run Kali. Alternatively, you can head over the internet and just buy a Kali flash drive. So I can search for Kali USB flash, or just search Kali Linux, and you'll see I can download the USB flash drive that you can then plug into your computer, restart, and you would have Kali Linux. So you can download the flash drive from the internet as well. Or what you can do, you can run it in a Virtualbox, also quite easy. So you can download the image. So either download the virtualization image, Virtualbox or VMware, and then load that in the program to run it. If you download the ISO file as bare metal, you can also run it in a virtual machine. So I would go in Virtualbox to new, give it a name, click next, select the other Linux, click next. Now the memory that you want to use for that system, and I'm gonna make it boot from the USB, so I don't need to add any hard disk. It will run a virtual computer, but it will start from the USB, so it doesn't need any hard disk. Continue. Then you would right click, settings, go to network and select bridged adapter to put it on the same network as the other computers. And then in storage, you want to go to empty and select Kali Linux, or choose disk file and select Kali Linux. Click live, click OK. And then if you would click start, it would start Kali Linux as a virtual computer, just like the one I'm running here. So that's another way to run Kali Linux. Now it doesn't really matter which way you run Kali Linux. So you can use call PC where you have Kali Linux, or you could have a Virtualbox image. There's also an option. You can use a mobile phone for Kali, which I think is a bit inconvenient, but it is an option. So as long as you can run Kali Linux. Now, in this course, of course, we'll use a lab. So besides our own computer, we'll also have another computer that we can target. So that can be a virtual computer. So it can be Virtualbox or VMware image running the server, or it can be another computer, which is then running the server that you can hack. In this video, we will explain about ports and how you can do a port scan. So whenever you use the computer and use the internet, you usually use websites, right? And you can open any website, and that website will go to your computer. Now, websites don't live in a vacuum. Websites exist somewhere in a computer. So there's a computer somewhere that has that website. Website is just a file, and that file is then transferred to your computer. Now that computer that has the website is called the server. So a server is the computer that has the website, and a client is your computer, right? So we have client-server network model where your client asks the server for the website, and the server responds with the website files. It can be images, it can be just the text of the website, the whole shabam. So given a server, how does the server know what to do? Because I gave you the example of a website, so communicating with a website, but there's much more kind of servers. So it can be a mail server, right? We use email daily. There is just plain websites. There is other kind of servers like game servers. So how does the server know that, okay, what data is for what? So there's different type of data. For example, which allows to remotely control a computer. It might be running a mail server, might be a messenger, file server, so sharing files. It can be something like a remote desktop team viewer. It can be a regular web server, as we said before. It can be a game server like World of Warcraft. So there will be data going back and forth from your computer to the server. And that allows you to do things on the internet. But how does the server know what data is for what? Right? So, for example, there can be a website that has both email and text. So, for example, Yahoo or websites like that, they can be running several services. So it doesn't have to be just one. It can be in a company, there can be a mail server, there can be file sharing in the network, there can be TeamViewer for working together. So there can be different things, right? So data will flow from your computer to the server and back, and the server somehow needs to differentiate between all these applications, right? So some data will be for mail, other data that you transfer, maybe it will be for remote desktop or for some computer game. So it does differentiate using ports. So in this example, running 3 services. So SSH service, so this application, the game World of Warcraft, so another application, and Apache. And all of them have different communication lines, as you see. So every communication line is called a port. Now there can be port numbers from 1 to about 65,000. So there's a lot of options for applications to pick a number to communicate on. And one thing to know is that applications almost always use the same ports. So what you'll find is that, for example, the web is always communicating on port 80, unless the system administrator decides to change that. So there's a list of some ports. I can zoom in a bit. Okay, maybe not. Okay, so for example, the service, so file sharing, is usually run on 2021. SSH allows to remotely control the computer, usually run on port 22. Mail, POP3 is a mail, usually run on 110. World of Warcraft, usually run on port 3724. Box Live, usually run on 30,074. So every application has a unique port. That is a unique communication line that allows to communicate between your computer and the server. And in that way, the server can differentiate between different applications. Otherwise, what you would need, if you would have just this, all of the data would come through the server and it wouldn't be able to differentiate which data is for what. So all these applications running on the server. And if you just have lots of data and one communication line, the server has no way of separating all the communication. So it uses ports for that, and you can think of ports as communication lines for an application. So application SSH communicates on line 22. Application World of Warcraft communicates on line 3 on this number. Application Apache is a web, allows you to do web servers, communicates on port 80. And then you have mail and messenger, file sharing. So all of them have their own communication lines. So that are these numbers. So whatever application you run, for example, iTunes, you'll see has its own communication line. Google Desktop has its own communication line. And these are called ports. So you'll see lots of different ports here. And given a client and a server, so given this situation, it will use ports to differentiate between the kinds of data. So what data is for what app. Now let's do an actual scan. So on the left, I have my client, and on the right, I have the server. So client server here, both are seen on the screen. Left is the client, right the server. So I'm gonna open a terminal in both of them. So, and in this one, I need to enlarge the font a bit because it's really tiny font. Gonna enlarge it. And what we need is the internet address, the network address of the server in order to communicate to it. So I do that with the command IP space adder space show. It's a Ubuntu server. You see Ubuntu web server here. So this command just tells me the address of this computer, of the server. So a lot of gibberish here, but this is the address. So you can see the IP address with IP adder show. If you have a different Linux system, a different Linux server, then the command might be ifconfig. On Windows, there's a different way to get the network address. So I can close this, won't be needing it anymore. So how can you see what applications the server is running? You can run a command called nmap. So if I type nmap, nmap is the program to scan. And the next thing to type is, of course, the address. So what computer should it scan? What server should it scan? And what it will do is scan for applications that are running on that computer, that are running on that server. So I press enter, and let me just enlarge it. So we make this a lot bigger. We can run the commands nmap space the IP address, and it will tell you which ports are running. So in this case, there's different applications running on the server. There's an SSH application, HTTP application. Now, HTTP is a web application, so a website. When you open Firefox or Chrome or whatever you use to browse the internet, what you'll see is always HTTP in front. So for example, if I go to google.com, you'll see HTTP in front. And so it's running a web server here application. Here there's pop3. So if you don't know what a service is, you can look it up on the internet. So you can go to, for example, google.com. Let's say we don't know what is pop3. So go google.com and type pop3. And you'll see it is email protocol. Next, there's IMAP. So what application is IMAP? We can just look it up. We type IMAP. And you'll see that's also for email. Now, it's giving me search result in Dutch, but in English it's the same, right? So you would have the same. You would also see email in there if you search for IMAP. So what do we know about this server? It's running the application SSH. So in case you don't know SSH, you can type in and you'll see different things here. And you'll see it's a network protocol, and also called secure shell. So it's a way to remotely connect to computers. So if you don't know what any application is, any protocol or service, one of these results, you can just copy it and paste it in Google, and that will tell you, okay, what does that application do? So it's running several here. We have the app SSH, remote control of the computer. It's running web server, HTTP, remember. And then we have POP3 and IMAP. Both of those were mail protocols, mail applications. So it's running three applications basically. Remote control the computer, SSH, websites, HTTP, and the other application is mail. So you see mail has several IMAP and POP3. Also here there's IMAP S and POP3S. The S there stands for secure. So that's like the same application, but a more secure version of it. So using the command nmap, that's the key thing to remember. With nmap, you can scan any computer, any network address or computer address with 4 open applications. So 4 applications that it's providing. Now any network address always is separated with 4 dots. So this is a network address and you'll see 4 dots in between. So that's how you recognize an internet address. Now anything on the internet is running has an IP address, so has a computer. So for example, we can use the ping command to find the IP address of any website. Let's say x.org. So you'll see it returns the internet address. And now we can use nmap to scan. So we type nmap space with that address, and it will tell you which applications are running on that computer. Now likely it's running a web server because it's a website. So you'll see it is running a web server. So this way you can scan with nmap space the IP address. You can scan for applications running on the server. So using app, we can scan for applications that are running. For example, we were scanning this IP before, that server. Sorry, that's not the one. We were scanning another one before, this one, and we found out that the applications that are running on it. For example, SSH to remotely control the computer. There's the web application server, or the applications for websites, and the applications for mail. So with any of these, we can try to connect and see if we can log in. For example, we can try to connect web. There might be a login form for web, and email always has login. So for example, for SSH, you would type SSH username at the IP address. And then type yes, and it will ask you the password for username. In the case of a website, so that's the second application, maybe there's a login form. So we can look for that website URL, http:// with the IP address. And you'll see, okay, this is the website. There is no login in this website. Next, we could try to connect with email. So you can use boot2root is an email protocol. If you go on the internet and you search for boot2root and C, you'll see the actual protocol commands. So how it works and all the commands. So you can say connect to it with, for example, telnet or with cat. And if we scroll down, you'll see authentication and all those commands. So I'm just going to show you. So I type netcat or nc, the IP address, and then the port. So the port here is 110. Now to authenticate, we can use the user command. So username. And in this case, authentication is not allowed on non-secure connections. But otherwise you would be able to then type password and retrieve email messages. So that is the 110 protocol, the mail protocol. So the other is for sending mail, for retrieving mail. Okay, so the most interesting one when we scanned, or in almost all of the cases, the most interesting one is the SSH protocol. And the reason is very simple, because SSH gives you a remote shell, a remote terminal, just like the one we're using now, but then inside that computer. So you can log into the computer and control the computer using the terminal commands. Similar to remote desktop, so Microsoft Remote Desktop allows you to do it graphically, so to graphically control a computer. Remote desktop. With SSH you have a remote shell, so a command line interface. Now we need two things to be able to log in over SSH. So when we run the SSH command, we need the username, and when we press enter, we also need the password. So one thing we could do is to try and guess the username. So we could use a list of names and then try to guess it. But we can also maybe find information about users online. For example, we go to the website itself. Maybe we can find information. So in this case, it says Ubuntu here. So that might be the username, right? It's a Ubuntu server. So maybe Ubuntu is the username. So what we could try to hack into it is just try Ubuntu and then try and guess the password. So, okay, that was not the password. You'll see it's loading, permission denied. Try to guess again. That way you can try to manually guess, but as you can see, that would just take ages. It's not like some good way to do it, because it just takes you ages, and yeah, you have to keep track of what password you tried. So what you can do instead is to do this automatically. You can use a tool called Hydra. So a tool called Hydra, and Hydra allows you to do it using a list. So we can type Hydra. Now we guess that the username is Ubuntu. Ubuntu -p with the password list. So this is the actual command, and we need a password list, right? So Kali Linux comes with password list by default. If we go to the directory user share word list, there's a file called rockutxt.gz. I'm gonna copy that to the Kali directory. And as you see, this is a .gz file, which means it's a compressed file, similar to a zip file. You see at the bottom here, gzip archive. So I'm gonna extract that. So right click, extract here. And you'll see now we have a text file, list file. You see it's 133 megabytes. So I'm not gonna open it with Notepad. I'm just gonna type it here, rockutxt. Then the application. Now the application that we want to crack or attack is not FTP. The one we want to attack is SSH. So we're gonna type SSH:/ with the IP address of the server. So that's 178. And now we just press enter, and it will try to crack the password using the password list .txt. So that password list has 3 million commonly used passwords in it, and then it will try one by one all of those passwords, and eventually if the password is in that list, it will find it. So this kind of hacking can take a while, because if it's on top of the list, of course it will find the password very fast. But if it's somewhere on the bottom of the list, it first needs to try those 13 million other passwords before it finds the password. So this, you can hack like this. It's called a brute force attack, where it tries every password automatically one by one. So Hydra is a tool you can use to do that. So it will take a while depending on what the password is, right? So if the password is on top of the list, it will find it very quickly. If it's on the bottom of the list, it's just gonna take a while. And of course, there's more than one password list. So in this case, we used rockutxt, but there's bigger list, even of 1 billion passwords. So it found the password here. What hackers will usually do is take notes. So it will save the password, of course. Gonna open Notepad here. So the password of SSH, and also they might record everything they do, because of course they will try a lot of things. So they might try to do nmap to do the port scan, and what they'd also do is then save that output. So save all the information that is available, because it serves as like a second brain. You can then use that information when you are busy trying to hack in a certain way, and maybe you can then later use the information that you used before. For example, now we found the password. So we have access to SSH, but maybe later we are trying something with email or with a web server, and then we forget about the password. So that would be really inconvenient. That's why it's important to just keep notes of your process. So as it shows, we have the here, it shows in green, the password is friends. So we can now try to log in. The username was actually Ubuntu. So we can say SSH Ubuntu at the IP address, password friends. And we are now logged in. We have hacked the server. So if I type, for example, cat, or actually it shows that it's Ubuntu here already when we log in. It says welcome to Ubuntu. So this is the actual web server. You can list the files in the directory or use any terminal command now to take over the system. I can type who am I, and you'll see I'm user Ubuntu. One thing to note is that the user Ubuntu is not administrator on the system. So if you want to be administrator, that is the user root. On any Linux system, the administrator of a system is called root. So there's two types of users. There is the regular users. Similar to Windows, you can have regular users, and there's the administrator user, which is called root, R-O-O-T. And the idea is, of course, now to become root, to become administrator in the system. Now I have a course on all kind of tricks you can use to become administrator, to become root, which is called Linux privilege escalation. But basically, there's different ways. So one of the ways is typing sudo -l. And that will tell you which commands you can run as root. So in this case, we can run any command as root. So for example, we can just type sudo bash is the shell, and you'll see now we are user root. So we did privilege escalation. We didn't need to do any complicated tricks. We just typed sudo bash, and because we didn't require passwords, so you can see if you can use this escalation using sudo -l. We were then able to type sudo bash and we became root. We are now administrator of the system, and we can do anything. We can install software, delete software, add users, delete users, anything a system administrator can do. We became the user root. So your username is always indicated before in the shell, or you can type the command who am I that shows you your current user. And whenever you hack a system, first you gain basic access into the system like a regular user, and then you want to become root into the system. So you want to use a trick to become root, to become the administrator of the system, because that of course is the ultimate hack. You don't want to be just a regular user or an employee. Usually employees have accounts in a computer, in a server. You don't want employee level, you want administrator, system administrator level. You want to become root. So now we hacked this computer. So the key takeaway here is that we used Hydra, or you can use Hydra. So if I exit this, we can use Hydra to have to log out. Exit will log out. We have to use Hydra to, we can use Hydra to crack applications with username passwords using a password list. Now you can also use a username list. So you can load them, or you can create your own username list. So with common username, names, save it as users.txt, and then type hydra -l users.txt -p your password list and the protocol you want to attack, and then it will try all of those passwords for all of those users in the list. So keep in mind this is a capital L, so if you want to specify a file with users, do capital L. If you want to, if you know the username, or if you just do a simple guess, you can do a lowercase l. So see the difference, -l. So that specifies if you know a specific user. For example, maybe you know an employee working in the company. So then you could say, okay, the username is probably that. So you can do both approaches, either with a username list with a text file, capital L, if you know the username, or you can use a lowercase l with the username. Now, capital P, you can specify your password list. Then your protocol, so that can be SSH, it can be file transfer protocol. If you type Hydra, you actually see the supported protocols, so, or the supported applications it can crack. So we found here SSH, but you'll see there's many other. There is the mail protocols, POP3, PC Anywhere, which I think is remote desktop. There's Cisco stuff here, file transfer protocol, web, HTTP, so it can also crack website logins, and several others. So these are the supported applications Hydra can crack. So you would type the application protocol, for example, in the SSH, and then the server IP address. And then it would start cracking. So that's the one key takeaway. And in the previous lecture, you learned that you can view the applications using Nmap, so you can see which applications are running. Then you can use Hydra to crack them, to find the password for a username. And of course, the third step is then to actually log in using that application. So that can be SSH. If you cracked a web login, of course, you would then go to the login, and for mail, you can also do that, or for any protocol for that matter. I mean, if you crack a remote desktop, you could also use the username password. So depending which applications the server are running, you can attack all of them using the tool Hydra, which is a brute force password attack tool. On the internet, you can find many things. So if you search for a company, you might actually find passwords for the company. For example, in a text file like this, where they tell you the usernames, for example, in this case, Gmail, and usernames with their passwords. So you might find a dump like this, and then of course you could immediately log in using any of those accounts because you have the usernames and passwords. Now, sometimes what they'll share instead is a so-called hashed passwords. So you have the usernames, but instead of the passwords, you have the hashed version of the passwords. So that is a different representation of the passwords that is hard to read and impossible to decipher, right? So we don't know the password from these strange characters. So those passwords are hashed. So some companies hash the passwords, which actually they are obliged by law to do, but a lot of companies don't do that. So a lot of companies just store password as simple text, and when they get hacked, you can just dump all of the passwords, right? But in the case of hashed passwords, how that process works is, given a password, for example, super strong password, then starts the hashing process, and that creates that hash. Now, the main idea of hashing is that if somebody hacks the server, they don't know the passwords. So, of course, using text like this, we don't know the passwords. And the hash is created using a process called hashing. So, given the hash process, which is just a computer program. Now, there's different programs for that. There's the program MD5, there's the program NTLM, many different programs that can create hashes, and that creates some text, some gibberish text like this that the hacker cannot use, or at least in theory. So the way it works, of course, is that you have your password, the password goes through a hash function and creates the gibberish. Now, you can do that even online. For example, 5 is one of the hashing processes. So MD5 is one of them, the hashing process. Can be a password, for example, 1234, click generate, and it will give you the MD5 hash, so the MD5 string. So this process, so if you have those gibberish text, you cannot just revert the process and have all of the passwords. So given this list, we cannot just revert them immediately and have the passwords, but we can do it the other way around. So given this password, we cannot do it. We cannot go back to the original password. But given a list of passwords, so if we have a list of commonly used passwords, we can calculate the hashes for all of them. For example, before we used rockutxt, and we have commonly used passwords, right? So 10 passwords, so we could say copy this, and we copy them, and we can calculate the hash for all of them. So let's say the MD5 hash, we can paste it, copy it, and paste it. And then we can do it for the next one. So we can paste the password, generate, copy it, and that's the password for that one. Now, of course, we can go through this entire list and just calculate the password hash for all of them. And why would you do that? Well, there's a very simple reason why you would do that. So then you have a lookup table. So let the next one calculate the hash. So now if you can do that for all of them, right? And then if you have a list of password hashes, like the one here, you can just compare the hash and see if it's in your list. Now, of course, you can do this manually. You can do everything manually, but we live in the age of automation. So there's automated tools for this that do this behind the scene. So, for example, one of those tools is CrackStation. So if you have CrackStation, crackstation.net, you can paste that and say, they come with this CAPTCHA stuff. But okay, click crack hash, and you'll see it cracked the hashes. So behind the scenes, it's using a lookup table where it knows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 corresponds to that hash. So it has a table like this behind the scene. Now another tool you can use is John the Ripper. So if you type John dash this format is, for example, 5 and then your password file, it will start cracking. Now we'll go into that more in the next video, and you'll also find some where you can find, for example, password lists online. So you might find password lists like this or password lists like this for any company, right? So you can search for a company and a password list, and maybe that exists. And then you have already initial access into the company. So if they put dump passwords like this, you have immediate access. If they dump the password hashes with the usernames, you still need to crack those hashes. And we'll go into that more in the next video. Now besides rockq.txt, there are many other password lists. And you can just find them online. So if I type password list, you'll see the top 20 common passwords. So really tiny lists. But scrolling about a bit down, you'll see, for example, seglist with 10 million passwords. So if I open that link, you'll see you can download the file here with 10 million passwords. Now it's probably going to be a huge file, so 10 million commonly used passwords. Let's right click to download, save link as, and you can download this list. And there's many password lists. So it's a tiny list of 200. You might search for password list with the word million in it to find big password lists. So download million password top lists, word list password top 10 million. So you can find different password lists online. So one of them is called seglists, the top one actually in the search results. And you can install that with Kali also with the package manager. So if I go to the Kali website, you'll see the password list here, different password lists. And we can install all of them with the command sudo apt install seglist. So if you copy this sudo apt install seglist to your terminal, so open a terminal, paste it in and press enter, then it would install all those password lists, or at least some password lists, into the directory user share seglist. So that contains a list of passwords, but also a list of usernames. So two different lists then being installed. So keep in mind, you can find password lists just in Google, or you can install seglists. For example, if we go to Google.com and let's say we search for a password list, we can type site:pastebin.com. You search pastebin.com. Pastebin is a website where people can paste text. So if we go to pastebin.com, you'll see people can create some text and share it with people on the internet. And lots of things are put in pastebin. So I can search for password dump site:pastebin.com. And you'll see, for example, Fosniff Corporation passwords. So that's some fictitious passwords. If you scroll down, you can see different password lists. You type password list dump. You'll find here, for example, LinkedIn, and other password lists. So you might click on any of them and then find the password list. So in this case, you'll see all these strange characters you also saw in this dump. So sometimes passwords are not shared in the regular text format. So when you have seclist, for example, so when we open that, okay, that will take just a moment to run. You saw that all of the passwords are readable, right? They are just in readable text. So all of the passwords. But in this case, the passwords are in the so-called hashed format. So what computers do is store password as hashes. And not all companies do that, but many companies store passwords as hashes. And that means that the password is not just readable. Like this is not the actual password here. What they do is hashing. Now there's different systems that do hashing. For example, on Windows there's NTLM hash. So we can search for NTLM hash calculator. Go to the top one. And let's say the password is password 123. Then the computer or Windows computer would actually store that as this text. As this so-called whatever the password is, let's say the password whatever, instead of storing then whatever in the computer, they store the digits or the hash, so this code. And given that code, of course, you don't know the passwords. However, it is possible to crack those hashes. For example, if we copy it and head over to crackstation.net. So crackstation.net, paste the hash and click that you're not a robot, click crack hash, and you'll see it cracked the hash. So it does that using a so-called list again. So crackstation.net has a password list inside that allows you to crack those hashes and retrieve the original password. Now let's take a look at the Fosniff Corporation. So here we see some username and their password hashes. So not the actual passwords, but the hashes. What we could do is copy them one by one into Crackstation. So we could copy one, head over to Crackstation, paste it in, click You're Not a Robot, and click Crack Hash. So okay, we have the password of that user. You'll see the type of program they use is not NTLM, but MD5. So here you see the supported programs that it can crack. We zoom in a bit. You'll see that I showed you the Windows passwords, but this one is MD5. So another way to create those hashes. Instead of doing that manually, so we could go one by one through that list, the Fosniff Corporation, so this password dump, copy them one by one, paste them in Crackstation, and then click crack every time. If you have bad luck, you will also need to solve the I'm not a robot every time. So we can do it on our Kali Linux instead. So we're gonna copy it. Right click, copy, paste it into a new file. I'm gonna save it, Ctrl S, give it as, or let's say fosniff.txt, that is the corporation name. And now I'm gonna close this, and open a terminal. So if I list the files in the directory, you'll see there is fosniff.txt. I can output the contents of it, which should be the same as so the username and the password hashes. And we want to find the actual password. We don't want the secured hashes, so we need to crack that. You can do that with John the Ripper. So we type John -- format is. Now we need to know which program was used for the hashing. And in this case, we actually know that because in crackstation.net, it says type MD5. So now we know the type of hash is MD5. So we can type raw MD5 with the file fosniff.txt and press enter. And you'll see that starts cracking all of the passwords for all of the users. And in this case, we had to specify raw MD5 because that is the hashing that was used. So you'll see it starts for every user to crack the passwords. And this can take a while depending on how big is your list and what are their passwords. But this will crack the hashes. Now, if it were Windows hashes, of course, in format, you wouldn't specify raw MD5, but you would specify NTLM. So depending on which format has been used, which program has been used to create the hashes. If I go to online, I can search for identify hash. So we find, for example, hash type analyzer. And let's say we find some hash online, for example, this one. We could copy it. So note that I copy after the colon. I don't copy the colon here. And paste it in. Click identify and you'll see it's likely MD5. So using this website hashes.com, we can identify hashes. And for example, we might try another one. So from this password dump, try to find out which hashing program was used. So search again. I'm gonna paste the hash and identify, and it doesn't know which hashing algorithm this is. So that can be a result as well. So maybe then you have to search for other ones. So identify hash. Might try the top one, paste it in, analyze, and it tells you, hey, it found the hash type for that one is SSH1. So it used SSH1 as the program to create the hashes. Now in the background, it has been cracking passwords. So you see for different users, it found the passwords. So sometimes you can find password dumps online that are just in plain text, so readable passwords. And sometimes what you'll find passwords not in readable passwords, but the actual hashes, so the username at the hashes.